And we've just gotten word that Venezuela has declared 7 days of mourning for President Hugo Chavez. Now, for more on the United States' reaction to his death is Jessica Stone. She joins us live here outside our studios. And Jessica, what can you tell us about what this means for the U.S. and what's been the reaction so far?
Well, we've been following the story, these claims by Vice President Nicolas Maduro about 2 U.S. Air Force attachés that used to work at the embassy in Caracas, that they have been asked to leave the country, and it is alleged by the Venezuelan government that they had something to do with Hugo Chavez's death, that they were spying on the Venezuelan military, among other things, and that they were plotting to destabilize the country. We now have a U.S. State Department spokesperson responding to those allegations, and I can tell you that Patrick Ventrell, who is the State Department spokesman, giving us this quote, says, quote, "We completely reject the Venezuelan government's claim that the United States is involved in any type of conspiracy to destabilize the Venezuelan government. We reject the specific allegations against members of our embassy. Notwithstanding the significant differences between our governments, we continue to believe it is important to seek a functional and more productive relationship with Venezuela based on issues of mutual interest." Now, we also know from the State Department that the U.S. State Department is expressing its condolences to the Chavez family, to the nation, saying that it will come alongside Venezuela and help in the diplomatic and democratic elections to come. And so we have much more hope and calmness coming from those types of statements, but certainly the U.S. taking issue with these accusations. What we know is this, is that the Department of Defense in the United States has confirmed that at least one of these U.S. Air Force attachés is back on his way back to the United States. We have not been able to confirm the identity of the second or whether that individual is on his way back to the United States. But even in these final hours, recent hours since the announcement of the death of Hugo Chavez, still tense relations between the United States and Venezuela, as we're even seeing the fallout from Hugo Chavez's death. Elaine.
All right, Jessica Stone reporting live from Washington. Thank you. One of the countries waiting anxiously to see the political impact on Venezuela following the death of President Hugo Chavez is Cuba. The island relies heavily on Venezuelan oil and investment, with about 35% of its trade and foreign currency earnings tied to trade with Venezuela. Let's go now to Michael Voss, who joins us live in Havana. And Michael, how are Cubans reacting to this news?
Well, Elaine, Cuba has lost its most important political and economic ally in Hugo Chavez. The authorities here are some of the very few who did know the nature and progress of Hugo Chavez's cancer. Most of his treatment was here at a secure hospital in Havana. So his death may not have come as a complete surprise to the leadership, but on the streets, the mood in Havana is one of shock, is one of sadness, and fear at what impact this may have on their daily lives. Hugo Chavez considered Fidel Castro his political mentor and bankrolled the so-called Cuban Revolution, helping its economy recover from the collapse of the Soviet Union. Today, Venezuela provides roughly half of Cuba's energy needs on preferential terms. 100,000 barrels of oil a day in return for Cuban labor. Around 40,000 Cubans, mainly medical personnel, work in Venezuela. Chavez turned to Cuba to get treatment for his pelvic cancer. But the secrecy surrounding his repeated visits here drew criticism from the opposition in Venezuela. And there are concerns that a new president in Caracas may not be so generous with Venezuelan oil. The loss of subsidized oil would be a severe blow to Cuba's struggling economy, but unlike the collapse of its former benefactor, the Soviet Union, the authorities here believe they're in a much stronger position to survive such a blow. Since taking over the presidency, Raul Castro has made a point of developing stronger commercial ties with other countries, including China, Russia, and Brazil. Back in the old Soviet days, sugar was Cuba's only major export. Today, it has a flourishing tourist trade, along with export industries in nickel, pharmaceuticals, and rum.
I think that the policy is we don't we must not repeat the mistake we made with the Soviet Union, because to have one single ally, one single partner is not safe in terms of national security.
Cuba isn't the only country that could be affected by a change of government in Caracas. More than a dozen Caribbean and Central American countries are members of PetroCaribe, an alliance founded by Hugo Chavez, which provides all of them with oil on preferential terms. Elaine, no one here is expecting Venezuelan aid to end suddenly overnight. It's much more, the perspective is much more of a soft rather than a crash landing. The vice president, Nicolas Maduro, who was Hugo Chavez's chosen successor to stand for president, is very close politically to the Cubans. He's been here a lot in recent months while Hugo Chavez has been in hospital. He personally knows President Raul Castro and the other senior figures here in Cuba. And even the opposition leader, Capriles, during last year's election campaign, did pledge to keep the Cuban doctors in Venezuela, even if he would renegotiate the terms and conditions. However, as I mentioned, the secrecy that the Cubans kept about the condition of Hugo Chavez did raise criticism in Venezuela, and there were accusations by the opposition too that Cuba was somehow manipulating and directing Venezuelan politics. Should at some time in the future the opposition come to power, they will almost certainly look less favorably on supplying this sort of aid and oil on preferential terms.
And Michael, you talked about the close relationship between Venezuela and Cuba. The last time anyone saw a photo of Hugo Chavez alive was in Cuba just a few weeks ago. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, very moving photographs of Hugo Chavez lying on a hospital bed, propped up on a pillow, and flanked by two of his daughters. Several photographs, some of them showing him reading the Cuban newspaper Granma to show that these were current photographs. They weren't fakes that had been somehow put together from previous images. I think you have to remember that when he came to Havana in early December for his fourth operation, at that point, nobody heard or saw anything of him. There were no photographs. There were no, in the past, he'd regularly phoned radio stations in Caracas to give them updates and to chat. This time, complete silence and no pictures. And there were growing rumors that perhaps he died. And at the same time, there were some protests developing in Caracas. The day before the photographs, a group of students had chained themselves near the Cuban embassy, demanding greater information on his condition. So these photographs were released then. Within a matter of days, he was flown back to Caracas. And we did wonder at the time whether he'd come back to slowly take over the reins of power or whether this was his final act before he died.
You know, you saw that picture and you maybe thought that he was doing okay, he was doing better. There's a lot been said about the relationship between Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro, Chavez calling Castro his mentor. And we just got word that Venezuela expects to observe a 7-day period of mourning for Chavez. Do you think we'll see anything like that there in Cuba?
I think we will see some very open outpourings of grief here. I think we'll see some very formal statements. I would expect flags to be flying at half-mast here, probably for those 7 days. The nightly news in Havana came on television at the top of this hour. I've been keeping half an eye on it, even while we've been talking. So far, the entire news has been taken up with pictures and with the speeches and with Maduro announcing his death from Venezuela. So far, we haven't had a reaction from the Cuban authorities, from Raul Castro, or from Fidel Castro. But I think by tomorrow morning's, by Wednesday morning's Granma newspaper, we would expect to see that. I think you have to remember, you mentioned the closeness of Hugo Chavez to Fidel Castro. It's hard to overestimate just how important Hugo Chavez was to keeping Cuba's revolution afloat. They were in dire straits economically after the Soviet Union collapsed almost overnight. Extreme hunger, there were blackouts, life was extremely hard. And then eventually along comes Venezuela, provides oil, provides assistance, and helped Cuba get back on its feet. And this is something the authorities here will never forget.
Okay, Michael Voss reporting live from Havana. Thank you so much for that report.